I just wanted to confirm with a thumbs up if you are seeing my presentation screen as opposed to my notes to keep me on track. Beautiful. Thank you everyone for joining us from across the continent and around the world. This presentation is called Navigating by the Stars, because for tens of thousands of years, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have read the night sky as a living map. Along the winds, the waters, the seasons, and the stories carried through country. Across the Pacific and far beyond, other Indigenous nations have done the same, voyaging, surviving, and thriving through deep attention to the more than human world. Navigation was never just about getting from one place to another. It was and is a philosophy of listening carefully, of moving with responsibility, of traveling in relationship, and of making decisions together in alignment with land, sea, and community. Today, I'm inviting us to think about Indigenous knowledges in this way, not as something to be added on, but as a compass for global research, a way of orientating ourselves ethically and relationally, of asking better questions, of being accountable to people and place, and of moving forward with purpose, respect, and reciprocity. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands of where I join today and of the lands where you join today. I pay respects to elders both past, present, emerging Indigenous leaders, and extend respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be present. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and their care for it for thousands of years. I recognise that others came to this country. There was violence and injustice. We gather on this land, we now share, aware of past injustices and the respect for the land and its ancient peoples. Open to the spirit who has ever been present here, we resolve to continue to appreciate its beauty, to protect its resources, and to honour the connection that traditional custodians have to this land. I want to acknowledge that these lands have never been ceded. So why Indigenous knowledges matter in global research? Indigenous knowledge systems matter because they represent some of the world's oldest and most sophisticated forms of science, grounded in thousands of years of observation and adaptation. These frameworks are holistic. They weave together environmental understanding, social structures, cultural practices, and community well-being in a global research landscape that often separates disciplines into silos. Indigenous knowledge offers a way of seeing connections and relationships that Western methods can overlook. A key strength of Indigenous knowledge is its long-term sustainability across Australia, the Pacific, Africa, the Americas, and the Arctic. Indigenous communities develop practices that maintain ecological balance for millennia, from fire management and fisheries governments to agriculture systems and climate observations. These examples show that Indigenous knowledge isn't just historical. It provides practical, tested pathways towards a more sustainable global future. Equally important is the relational ethic embedded in Indigenous knowledge. Research is not simply data collection. It is a relationship between people, land, ancestors, and future generations. Knowledge is held collectively, guided by trust, reciprocity, and responsibility. This challenges dominant research models that prioritize individual achievement or institutional benefit, offering instead an approach centered on community well-being and long-term stewardship. Sorry, I wanted to also close. Finally, Indigenous knowledges matter because it broadens our definition of expertise. Global research has often privileged Western methods and academic credentials, overlooking the deep expertise held in communities through oral traditions, lived experience, and generational practice. When we recognise these knowledge holders as experts in their own right, global research becomes richer, more inclusive, and more innovative. The challenges we face today, climate change, health inequity, cultural erosion, are too complex for a singular worldview to solve. Indigenous knowledges invites us to expand the table, value multiple ways of knowing, and build solutions that are grounded, ethical, and culturally responsive. I want to begin by following my own cultural protocols and in introducing myself, my lineage, and the place I speak from. I speak today as an initiated Torres Strait Islander man carrying cultural responsibilities and have been handed down through my elders, my family, and my communities. These responsibilities connect me to land, sea, sky, kingship, and the teachings that guide how we live, behave, and care for one another. So, I speak in my language, I say to you within this Zoom, Tarangai is descendant of Daybao clan. My clan is Daybao from Saibai Islands with strong connections to Bado Island in Zenavkes, which is now known as Torres Straits. This is the place I speak from as my true identity. But I also speak as a registered nurse, trained within Western systems of health, systems built on biomedicine, clinical evidence, and institutional practice. I have walked hospital wards, cared for patients, and worked with instructors that often see the body through a different lens. I also speak as a researcher, working in public health to understand how communities experience change, how knowledge is held, and how we can design responses that honour both science and, more importantly, culture. These identities do not compete with one another. They sit in relationship. They meet at what Indigenous scholar Professor Martin Nakata describes as the cultural interface, the space where two knowledge systems come into contact, where tensions and differences exist, but where creativity, innovation, and new understandings can emerge. Walking in both Indigenous and Western world means navigating that interface every day. It means understanding that knowledge is not singular, that stories, observations, data, ceremony, and science all have a place. It means recognizing that each system has strengths, limits, and responsibilities, and that the future of research depends on our ability to hold these knowledges side by side, not in competition, but in conversation. The strength I bring today comes from that interface, from standing firmly in my cultural, while also engaging deeply within Western disciplines. It is from this place, this meeting of worlds, that I share my words with you today. I am from Zenavkes, known in English as the Torres Strait Islands. Our islands sit at the very top of Queensland, between the tip of Cape York and the southern shores of Papua New Guinea. The region stretches across 48,000 square kilometres of open sea. With more than 90% of it being ocean, this vast sea country is the heart of who we are as Torres Strait Islander peoples. The sea provides food and resources through hunting and fishing, sustaining our families and communities, but it also maintains our identity. Sea country connects us spiritually and physically, grounding us in culture, ceremony, and belonging. To understand health and well-being, you must first understand this. Our strength comes from deep intergenerational knowledge systems, like all First Nations people here in Australia and beyond. Knowledge of tides, reef, winds, seasons, and constellations. These teachings have been carried forward with care, responsibility, and precision for thousands of years. They guide how we live, navigate, relate to one another, and care for country. Our well-being is inseparable from our seas, our lands, and our skies, and from the wisdom handed down through our elders and ancestors who have read, interpreted, and protected this country since time immemorial. For thousands of years, the stars have been both a compass and an encyclopedia for my people. The constellation of Taggai, the great warrior, and Baidam, the shark, guide our navigation across the seas. They also mark the turning of the seasons, telling us when to plant, when the trade winds will shift, when turtle and dugong are hunted, and when important ceremonies take place. As a child, my elders taught me to read these signs. They showed me how the stars, the tides, the winds, the flowering of plants, and the movements of animals all speak to one another. Every observation carries knowledge, knowledge refined, protected, and passed down through countless generations. These teachings are not only stories, they are systems of knowledge. They are precise place-based sciences developed through profound observation, lived experience, and cultural responsibility. Across Zenithcast, traditional owners continue to record and share these insights, strengthening the intergenerational knowledge base that guides our lives today. Our stars still guide us, just as they always have. They connect us to country, to ancestors, and to cultural lifeways that ensure our communities remain strong, now and for generations to come. Historically, and still today, research has too often been used as a tool of colonization. Research has been conducted on Indigenous peoples rather than with us, without proper consultation, without cultural protocols, and without sitting down with elders or listening to those who best understand their community needs. The consequence is that researchers have told stories about us rather than creating space to speak with us. Truth telling begins with naming these power dynamics and bringing them into a clear view. It requires acknowledging that all knowledge is culturally situated and that Indigenous knowledge holders have always carried and continue to carry highly sophisticated understandings of land, sea, kingship, governance, and well-being. Western science is just one knowledge system among many. It is not the default nor the benchmark against which offers must be measured. If we want to move forward together for a collective benefit, research must become accountable, relational, and grounded in truth-telling that centres Indigenous voices and knowledges from the onset. It calls for a rethinking of what ethics truly means and for asking honest questions about who benefits from existing ethical frameworks. When we work in right relationships with elders and communities with respect, reciprocity, and humility, research itself can shift. It can become a site of transformation, a vessel for truth telling, and a pathway for meaningful change for the people and places it seeks to engage with. If truth telling names the past, then solidarity is about how we choose to walk together into the future. Too often, research has been extractive, taking knowledge, publishing findings, and moving on. Solidarity asks something entirely different, that research is carried out with communities, not on them. For me, solidarity means aligning research with community priorities, with sovereignty, with continuity of culture and knowledge. It means understanding that the struggles and strengths of Indigenous people in Zenithcast and beyond are connected to those of our relations across the Pacific, Aotearoa, the Americas, the Arctic, Africa, and beyond. Research and solidarity is not charity. It is shared responsibility and an agreement to stand with one another, to listen deeply, and to be guided by those who hold cultural authority. When we approach research in this way, as solidarity, as shared responsibility, rather than extraction, It becomes more than a method. It becomes a practice of justice, reciprocity, and care. It becomes a way of ensuring that the work we do honors the people, the places, and the knowledges that make it possible. I began with the stars because for Torres Strait Islanders, Tagai and Baida are more than constellations. They are teachings about how to live well, how to move together, and how to stay in the right relationship with one another and with country. Our ancestors looked up to the stars to know when the winds would turn, when to plant, when to hunt, and when to gather in ceremony. Today, we can look to them again, not for navigation alone, but for the guidance on how to find our bearings in a complex world. Truth telling roots us in where we have come from. Solidarity shows us how to walk alongside one another. And the stars remind us that the futures are intertwined, connected across oceans and continents, cultures and disciplines. Like our ancestors, we too are navigating uncertain seas. But we are not without direction. Indigenous knowledge, carried carefully across generations, can be our compass. And if we follow it with respect, humility, and courage, then we can chart a future that sustains our homelands, strengthens our communities, and protects our shared humility. I want to leave you with the words of an Aboriginal elder and activist, Auntie Lila Watson, whose wisdoms continues to guide movements for justice across the lands and beyond. She said, if you've come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. These words hold immense power. They remind us that solidarity is not an act of charity, and research is not an opportunity for rescue. Solidarity is a commitment, a recognition that our well-being, our futures, and our liberation are interconnected. For me, this is the heart of research as solidarity. It means showing up with humility. It means listening before acting. It means valuing Indigenous leadership, sovereignty, and knowledge systems as essential, not supplementary, to any work that seeks to create lasting change. When we understand that our futures are bound together, research stops being an extractive exercise and becomes something else entirely. A shared journey, a collective responsibility, a way of strengthening connections between peoples, places, and generations. And if we hold this truth close, and if we move with respect, justice, and care, then research can become a compass that guides us, like the stars of Tagai, towards a shared future built on dignity, reciprocity, and relational accountability. This is why we're here today. This conference invites us to be a part of a global conversation that centres Indigenous knowledge in shaping the future of research. It brings together researchers, thinkers, and change makers from Australia, Aotearoa, the Pacific, Africa, Canada, America, Europe, and beyond, all gathering to spotlight Indigenous research. Indigenous leadership and true cross-cultural collaboration. As the opening of this event, my hope is that these reflections become your anchor for the day ahead. I ask you to listen deeply, to build relationships grounded in respect, and to imagine research not as extraction, but as a solidarity in action. May we navigate this conference and the future of our work and research together, guided by truth-telling, guided by community, and guided by the stars that have carried our peoples for generations. Ngai ka yamuli gitu murre na moino, mina ki meso, ngai ka yamuli gitu munpa. Ngai ka yamuli inabza gitu munpa. Minaki meso karmin ngayapa. I say in my language, kalau kawauya, to all that took the time to listen to for the opening of this talk, a very big thank you. In my language, I say to you, Minaki meso, a very big thank you.
Thank you so much. And Karen will help us moderate, but maybe we can start with questions from the audience.
Chief Francis, I really enjoyed listening to your talk. You've touched on things that I've been thinking about carefully throughout my research, which is what is, the role of what is a possible role for me as a non-Indigenous researcher in Australia. So, been here for 18 years and have the privilege of working with community-controlled organizations for the past 15 years. So that's been, I suppose, the pathway that I use to open up relationship and maintain relationship. I'm interested to hear more your thoughts on how we can be vigilant to extraction and extractivist approaches to research, because it seems to be something that the university pushes us to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Peter. This is a very good question when we think about what is the path forward. And I think it really is empowering the next generation, empowering the current generation in leading what that looks like. What does it look like for change based on the values, based on the understandings of First Nations people? When we get into the slippery slope of extraction, it becomes what drives us to know. What drives us? What are the KPIs to achieve what we set out to achieve, regardless what damage we are doing on the way? And another thing is we've got to be open in allyship to understand our ontological limits. We get to this place of we don't know where the ceiling is. So am I not to know? Do I know? Do I just carry on? That's when the harm is done. When we're working with community, not on community, it's a shared responsibility and also pulling up what is driving us to make sure that we reach our achievables, whether it's KPIs, whether it's funding grants, and to sit with community and understand that in those teachings from community, we hold, as an outsider of that community, huge responsibility in understanding what those limits look like in our ontological views. Now, to give a short example or a small example, Peter, if you were to come with me to Zenith Cass, you and I can stand on the shores of my waters. You and I can both see the fish in the water, but your ontological limits will not allow for what I can see beyond that fish, how to catch that fish, how to spear that fish. And that there is ontological limits. Through my teachings, I'm able to hunt those knowledge systems. So it's working with and understanding that we pose when we're outsiders coming in, that there are those limits. And those limits are, pushed because we want to begin to understand. And that's where it becomes that slippery slope of dangerous. But empowering communities to be upfront as opposed to, the three categories that harm was done when we worked on. We're currently in a place in research where we're working with. We need to get to a place where we're working for. Those drive, values that community want to achieve are driven by community. And we have to get in that place. And we all have a role. Within this room, we have a role. We have huge skill sets. I've been trained in, multiple universities. I go back to community, that absolutely means nothing. I can say I've got multiple degrees and they're like, yeah, but can you maintain this community as my cultural protocol? So it's really empowering community to go, what is the best of the value? So beautiful question, Peter. And we need to get more collectively in empowering those communities. Not having organizations saying this is what we want to achieve based on KPIs. So we go into communities under the cover of working with, and then all of a sudden those KPIs are driving those outcomes. Something I do as a political scholar is to push back to what's driving those, not push back on community, push back to those funding models. This is what has changed. This is what works. So we all have this role. Thank you, though.
Perfect. Thank you. Anyone else got a question at the moment? Oh, yes, we do have one. Mr. Nona, are there any dedicated networks to help Tiwi Islands early career scholars? I think that's right.
Absolutely. But also, society now create a big world but a small community, and we can interconnect. I mean, for that question, I mean, I put myself out as I do have other scholars and First Nation scholars that we can join collectively. Join on LinkedIn. But in Torres Straits, there's other universities, and again, this is a possessiveness. They all work in different areas. There's JCU that work up towards the north, and I'm not here to promote, but we are here at QUT with an incredible Indigenous scholars. And if you want to reach out to see what those pathways look like, of my experience within institutions, absolutely. Like I can talk about, how I've gone on to, as a PhD candidate, to drive $12 million of research. But as a kid, I grew up on side-by, hunting. So there is ways and mechanisms that we as Indigenous scholars can get to the forefront to actually embed our authority in what's best for community. So if you want to connect or, just reach out. There's heaps of sub-communities, nothing formally established.
That's good. LinkedIn's a good one. Thank you for that. Everyone's generally got access to that. So thank you. There's another question in the chat. Keep them coming. Hey, Francis, thanks for the excellent presentation. You mentioned empowering communities. How does that square with humility? Is it our role to empower or just share the space? I would like some enlightenment. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Miku, if I'm saying that correct. Miku. That's a great juncture point that you've highlighted, but we're playing on words. When we think of empowerment, it is giving space. So I'm not saying from a belittlement or a deficit mindset that you empower that, they need so much help. So humility is to know that giving space is empowering. So we look at it in different ways, but we have to get to a place that it's not about us when it's for someone else. It's not about us as non-Indigenous researchers, as an institution, and going, let me empower you from a deficit mindset. It's the empowerment is giving space. The empowerment is giving what's best for community. So, yeah.
Francis, there's another question from Eziaku. As a non-Indigenous researcher, I'm always drawn to Indigenous research because I see a lot of similarities between the Maori culture and my Igbo culture. Do you think there is a place for such synergy in research?
Yeah, and the sad truth, which is the history component, the similarities is past injustices to those communities that you highlight. And in true allyship, this is not saying that there isn't a space for non-Indigenous researchers. There is a space. We've got to know our limits, and we've got to know what support looks like. We've got to know what our skill sets are that we draw from. Absolutely, in true allyship, in getting to a global place of solidarity, that is in that cultural interface that we work together. That is a place that we upskill what is considered as, institutional skills that we use, research methods. We should be drawing from Indigenous people in Indigenous methodologies. There is a place, but in those settings that you talk about, there has been injustices. There is a suppression, and it's not by chance, it's by design. So let's untangle what has suppressed, what has, controlled that narrative to get to a place that you could play in bringing that to the forefront as a researcher, non-Indigenous.
Francis, if I may, there's always in working in these spaces as an educator, we always come up against how do we deal with the fear from non-Indigenous colleagues of unintentionally causing offence, when that fear can prevent us from properly engaging.
Yeah. In true reflection that everyone has to undertake, through reflexivity, fragility is an important learning tool. No one wants to get there. You know, if I was to be open, I would say you will make mistakes, not intentionally, but you have to be comfortable in knowing that you will trip and someone will hold you to account. You know, these systems create us to be the best at what we are. So in that sentence, that highlights that I shouldn't make mistakes. But the problem is when you're working alongside, whether it's in curriculum designs, how do we legitimately embed Indigenous knowledges within curriculum when we work alongside community? We're not going to know. And that's what I was going back to in the comment with Peter, that there are limits that we have. And we've got to be comfortable through reflection or reflexivity. Our unconscious bias with forges the way we think currently in making those mistakes. And we've got to unpack in our own worldviews that we come about making mistakes because, you know, it's all formalized by the way that we view the world. And we have to be comfortable. We have to be comfortable in fragility. We have to be comfortable that we don't know in working alongside incredible Indigenous scholars. And learn, be open to learn. You know, I have, you know, publishing in some journal articles, the minute you talk about Indigenous knowledges, it is so hard for us to talk about a system, a knowledge system in peer-reviewed journal articles. And the reason I point this out is because we're constantly up against these barriers of like, how do we publish? How do we, you know, embed legitimately in curriculum? You know, one of the biggest questions is, what is Indigenous knowledges? Well, my question back to a Western society is, what do you deem as gold standard? Peer review? Well, I'm drawing from 65,000 years worth of knowledge. There ain't nothing more peer review when we think about those systems and knowledge systems. So having 65,000 years worth of knowledge, we've got to understand as a non-Indigenous that we will make mistakes. We can't draw from those. We are doing, you know, finding space to work alongside. So, yeah.
We have a really long question from Emma Marshall. Thank you so much, Emma. Goodness, I don't know where to start. Could you advise on respectful and ethical pathways to initiate conversations with First Nations knowledge systems? I think, I'm sorry, Emma, if I've messed that one up. Yeah, advisor on respectful and ethical pathways to initiate conversations. Let's go with that.
Yeah, so this is place-based here within so-called Australia.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Right, I see, for a plate. Yep, gotcha.
yeah, so that being said, is one thing that I will say is what we tend to do and what research tends us to do is make everything homogenous. We're not one homogenous group. So to answer your question respectfully, I would be saying, where are we working? Who are those leaders? As opposed to, you know, we have to get to a place that we can all jointly benefit of. But when we're working closely with community, we've got to understand that what may work in Zenadcast, Torres Strait, may not work in Bunjalung country in northern New South Wales. So it's working with and for that community and then getting to a place of how do we alleviate it up? Who are those leaders that we can draw from? So if it's, you know, seek guidance on whether this concept is of interest, it should be of those community leaders.
It's in the context of financial literacy. I've just read that bit. Sorry, Emma. So then would you say to Emma in that situation where she's developing a proposal to limit it, reach out to the communities where she is putting together the proposal, that would be the first place to start?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, tied to like what are the social determinants? Like if we're talking about financial literacy, like we live in a world where, you know, financial literacy is not a part of us. Yes, we trade, but we trade with an economy that is different to what suppresses us here in, big cities when we think of social determinants, when we think of housing, when we think of education, access, when we think of all the things that suppress us as First Nations people. And now we're going in to say, well, what is financial literacy? We've got to unpack from whose lens. Is it a deficit mindset? Is it a strength base? Because this is something that is a form of control. This suppresses some communities. When we think of the remote communities up in the Northern Territory, the monitoring, the governance, and then we want to talk about, so there's a number of ways to do this. Unless I saw the project, I definitely would look at ways to work with those leaders. What does that look like? What are the issues within those communities?
Great. I think, Emma, I hope that's helped a lot. I think, awesome. Thanks for the great question, Emma. There's just switching briefly now to regenerative agriculture in Australia. So this is another interesting one, isn't it? And how that connection to nature and Indigenous communities could be done in a respectful way. Thanks, Pradeep, for that question.
Yeah, if I heard it correctly, again, it all comes back to what are those relationships or established relationships look like as opposed to an extractive mechanism. But, if I share within this room, Zoom room, the knowledge systems is profound when we think of interconnected with country and culture. I could go back to elders who can read the landscape without a thermometer. The Western ways is to go, well, what temperature is where? But the interconnectedness of First Nations people is to go, I can read the landscape without a thermometer and no hotspots. And this is the beauty of, working with and understanding that these knowledge systems are so profound. Now, one would say to me, how do you know at what parts of the island are hot? These elders and these knowledge holders would be interconnected to see how the birds fly. Are they soaring? Are they working to get to a certain height? And will know that the animals that they are hunting are not in those areas. So this is the thing. But for a Western way of understanding this, to go, I need to know the degree, or I need to use a thermometer. It's that interconnectedness and working with leaders that understand how to interpret country and landscape.
Fantastic. Thank you. Another in-depth question now from Philip. I've been reading deeply into phenomenological philosophy, so basically understanding the lived experiences of the community under investigation, and noticed a strong resonance with relational Indigenous ontologies. Has phenomenology been part of your research journey?
It has, and I draw from incredible scholars, number of, but Aileen Morton Robinson writes about this. The Indigenous feminist standpoint theory, and how do we apply that within giving voices and leadership within community. So I draw from other scholars as well, but one that is notably Professor Aileen Morton Robinson. Yeah.
Francis, we're all learning so much from you. One thing I really appreciated in your presentation was you switching to your own language. And we've got another question about that from Miku. Having the colonial language as a default in academic and research poses another difficulty as research in solidarity. I come from a developing country, and I speak the national language of my country, but if I don't speak the language of the Indigenous people whose traditional knowledge I'm researching, how can I navigate that sensitively?
Yeah, this is a hard one because I face this. I'd love to write my whole research in my language, but who's measuring it? Who understands it? A sovereign place is to say, I will write about that in my way of our tongue. But it's for the dissemination, it's for the pickup. There's a variance in how you go about it, and everywhere's different. I know I personally would like to, and I know people have, What does those authorships look like? What does that language looks like? You know, we look across to our brothers and sisters in Aotearoa. They use country, mountains as authors, rivers. And this here is coming from that sovereign place of we know what is and how it should be done, where these measuring tools of like what is an output, what is a journal article, holds these constraints on how we want to do things. Language is one of them, because otherwise, what's true dissemination? For us, it's to say that we know the answers too, but dissemination would be, you know, what's the H index of a scholar? What is the citations of that paper? When being sovereign is to go, well, this is my identity and this is how I communicate. And instead of, you know, Indigenous scholars doing the labour, it should be everyone else doing the labour going, I don't have to do the work to unpack that. We have to get to that place.
Frances, as she often does, Ola has asked a question that brings together, I think, the heart of what you've been talking about. She says, I know your network is global and that you travel extensively to support other communities. So she's hoping that you might share some of the insights that you gathered along the way. What's one core ethical principle from Indigenous worldviews that you believe all global researchers should adopt?
And said in one word, solidarity. Solidarity. Like, I can walk into a community, whether it's, you know, as Ola is stating, I do travel and I work alongside many communities. Funding models don't totally support us. What I have moved to in different organizations is philanthropic, because it gives us that freelance. But in solidarity, I can walk into a community and see the visions forward, the lived past, all aligns. And for me, it's, you know, I don't have to, it's not like going to a GP and retell my story. We have collectively the same story, and the fight collectively is in front of us. And I think within this room, collectively, we are either supporting, we are either empowering, or we are standing alongside to make sure that solidarity is the true thread in what holds us all together.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. You've really helped us to understand a lot more deeply what you've been doing and all the work that you've, as we said, traveling everywhere that you go. We really appreciate your time today. A few people have been asking in the chat, is this recorded? And yes, it is, and will be available. And Ola, did you want to finish with to say anything before we shortly we will be moving to our
Thank you so
presenters?
much. Thank you so much. I will move to the second room to moderate the second room, and I will leave everyone in the good hands of Karen and Carrie, and then afternoon we'll have Tash. So thank you so much, Frances, for your time. I am so inspired as usual. I speak to you, I learn a lot. Each time I meet you, have no idea how much you influence me. So thank you so much. It was amazing, and I will be rewatching it in a calm room later.